I've been in mindfulness spaces, Buddhist spaces, yogic spaces, somatic spaces, coaching spaces, where there's this desire for heartfelt, peaceful connection with each other, so much so that they'll bypass what you have to go through to get to that place.
Yes.
And if you don't do the accounting of that history, who's in the space, who's not in the space, why aren't they in the space, who can speak up, who can't, what's happening in their lives, what are the relations between us, whether we want to drop them or not, they're still there because we haven't, as a world, worked through those things. And so if we don't account for them, then any kind of peace we get is a very fragile, shallow piece.
Welcome to The Deep Coach, the podcast where we explore the transformational journeys that shape us and that propel us to change the world. I'm your host, Jonathan Hermida, and in each episode, we sit down with those who have journeyed into the depths of spiritual transformation and who are now reshaping the world through their presence and their work. In listening to these incredible human beings, you'll find insight, inspiration, and practical tools to support your journey as a coach and as a human being. My guest today is Beth Berila. Beth is the director of the Gender and Women's Studies program at St. Cloud State University, a transformational coach, and an equity-focused organizational consultant whose work bridges social justice, embodiment, spirituality, and deep inner transformation. Beth brings decades of experience from academia, activism, and somatic practice into her work supporting individuals, communities, and organizations toward more humane and sustainable ways of being. This was an excellent and wide-ranging conversation. Together, we explore how social justice and spirituality intersect, the limits of purely intellectual approaches to change, the importance of collective healing, and why embodiment is essential if we're serious about transforming ourselves and the world we're a part of. I'm excited for you to listen to this one. Enjoy. Beth, it's really wonderful to be here with you. And as we talk about these transformational stories, journeys, you can say, I always like to start in the beginning, meaning who was Beth prior to any inkling of any sort of transformational journey that eventually came?
Beth was the catalyst for some transformational journey because Beth was a surprise in the world. Um, yeah, my mother went to college. She was the kind of middle-ish sibling of 5 siblings, none of whom had gone to college. She was the first one who wanted to. And my grandmother, who was always my maternal grandmother, who was my fierce ally in the world, advocated for my mom because my granddad was a factory worker, excuse me, and felt like it meant mom was better than the family. But she was a learner like I am and just really wanted to go to college. So grandma advocated for her and she went. And then she got pregnant with me in college in 1970. And despite the fact that the feminist movement and the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement and the lesbian and gay movement were happening or had happened in the 60s, pretty certain that hadn't hit suburbia. And it was a big for her to be pregnant in college out of wedlock, I say in quotation marks.
Right.
And I say all of that because after years of therapy, I have realized that that was really formative in many ways for me, both positively and in challenging ways. In many ways, so mom had me, she was going to give me up for adoption, but I was a preemie, and she convinced, they wouldn't let her hold me. Story goes, they wouldn't let her hold me because she was going to give me up for adoption. And for whatever reason, she decided to keep me. And it was a big challenge for many years. You know, she raised me alone with the support of my maternal family line for the first 7 years of my life before we met my stepfather. And, you know, we financially struggled. We were very supported in many ways by my maternal family, but also judged, especially my mom. Years later, she told me she went to a family gathering and only one person would hug her. So I say all of that because I have realized, like in utero, that I got messages about kind of redeeming both of us. Um, and so years later, one of my therapists referred to me as Sparkle Girl,
Mm.
which has kind of stuck. And it is both my superpower and one of my challenges, which isn't that how it goes, right?
Yeah.
So if I sparkled enough, if I was good enough, if I was worthy enough, we would be loved, and whatever shame had been projected on us would be redeemed. And all of that was unconscious, of course. Um, and my grandparents doted on, but I still years and years and years later realized that I got those messages, really young, even before I was born. And I changed the trajectory of my mother's life, right? She says, and I believe her, that I'm one of the best things that happened to her. And in 1970, without a college degree, without a lot of experience, we come from working class roots. She didn't get to be the teacher she wanted to be. Um, you know, yeah. And so I have spent years learning how to own the sparkleness without being owned by it.
Mm.
Yeah.
So powerful. I mean, just one question, but it's
Yeah.
beautiful. I mean, this is indicative of our community and how we just we go
I
straight
know. We're
into,
just going right there.
we go into the heart of the matter. The other thing that stood out is you being conceived in college during the civil rights moment, given how much basic rights, you can say civil rights and university setting have influenced your life or are a part of
Yes.
your life. Isn't that
Yes.
incredible how just
It
like,
is.
it was meant to be, the setting created in a sense who
Mm.
became.
It's interesting. Very insightful. You'd think that I would have made that connection. I had not. There were pivotal moments later in my own college career that shaped my trajectory to be a professor, but I never quite put that on. And I went to college in the same place my mom did. So,
Incredible.
undergrad. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. So then as a young woman, you're sort of passed down some of these things consciously and unconsciously, and you're trying to make sense of the world, trying to make sense of yourself in this world. As a young woman, prior to deciding to go off into college and that being
Mm.
sort of then a turning point for you, what was your compass, or if, I didn't have a compass in high school personally, so not everybody has a compass, but I guess what was your relationship to yourself in high school prior to college?
I'm not, it's hard for me to tell how much I'm rewriting my story, my youth story through the lens of my current age and all the work that I've done. Um, I mean, I think that my parents would say people outside of my lived reality would say I was, well, I would agree, an overachiever, um, very dedicated student, loving to learn. I was an only child. I had a stepsister, but I rarely saw her. So, for all intents and purposes, I was an only child and very lonely. Um, and so, a lot of my life was in books and imaginary worlds. And, I was a college newspaper editor in charge of clubs and all of that. So, in some ways, I was developing the leadership that I have now. But also, I was incredibly shy, incredibly self conscious, um, as I said, lonely. And um, maybe I didn't realize I was missing a compass until years later, like a spiritual compass. Spirituality was not a part of my growing. Um, so, in many ways, I had a gifted, charmed life. I was well cared for, well loved, always economically secure, despite, well, except for the early years, despite working class roots. And yet, years later, I realized I was always trying to prove my worth instead of accepting that it just is. That took me years and years. Still
Yeah.
on that journey.
Yeah, we all are in
Yeah.
so many ways, right?
Yeah.
In what ways was college transformative for you?
Mm. Well, I tell this story a lot because it rocked my world. I went to college as an honors student, straight A high school student. I just had it down. And of course, college will challenge all of it. And I walked into my first college class, and a person who would become my mentor walked in the space with skin tight leather pants, snakeskin cowboy boots, a ponytail, an earring, resident Marxist feminist of the economics department, and that man rocked the world. He taught me critical thinking. He challenged me to not just say something because that's what I had been taught, to be able to articulate why I believed what I believed. And in doing that, I discovered I didn't necessarily. And I found what I really did believe. And he taught classes like the feminization of poverty and uh, really helped me understand structures and how they work to limit people or overprivilege people. And then I found feminism in my gender and women's studies classes. I tell the story that when I went to college, I went to be first a journalist and then international business major. And I used to say I wanted to drive a hot pink Jaguar uh, until my best friends in college, who were like artists and progressives, were like, one, I look like a Barbie doll. I was like, oh, right. She did have that pink. And two, I found out how much Jaguars cost.
Yeah, right.
That like economic inequality. Some people can't eat and other people can buy really expensive cars. And so that was just indicative of like, yeah, I don't want that. And so I remember walking through college campus and looking up at my professor's window. He had this giant fish art sculpture in his window. So I always knew which one was his. And I was like, I want his life. I want to be a professor. And so I talked to him and I was like, what should I study? And he's like, go to the library, walk around, decide what you want to read for the rest of your life. And that's what I did. So it was really transformative, and I'm very grateful for the path that it opened. Years and years later, with the current career shift that I'm in, I'm beginning to reflect on some of the downsides of academia. Well, I've been reflecting on it for a long time, but just like with some perspective, did it keep me in my head way too much in ways that got in the way of more faithful being transformation, which is where deep coaching comes in for me.
Yeah.
And it's where my activism has been, where my leadership has been, where so much growth and community have been. So it's a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe I'm learning for something else. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah. It certainly sounds like that way with everything that I've been, reading of you and knowing of you. And I'm curious to stick here for a bit in terms of the intellectual side of academia. Well, obviously, academia isn't fully intellectual, but sometimes it stays there, right? And it stays sort of in theory and in words on a paper and kind of there, and then the conversational and all that. Talk about some of those sort of downsides. I'm curious about the positive aspects because there's many as well. But what are some of those downsides that you started to discover?
Yeah. Well, I began moving into my embodied journey maybe 15 or so years ago. Because I had started to feel both in my own unlearning and unraveling of harmful messages and in my teaching that we can, as human beings, we can get things politically and intellectually. We can say we believe in social justice. We can say we believe in equitable relationships, or that we believe we are valuable as human beings. But then deeper wounds and deeper lack, really disembodiment, that is, I think,
Yeah.
produced by a lot of this world, often makes us act in ways that don't align with what we know intellectually. And so like I would see students in one moment having a really empowered voice, and in the next moment say really self-disparaging things. And I recognize that in myself, right? Some of it's learning developmentally, some of it's it's lifelong journey, but it also got me as a deep teacher really wondering, where's that disconnect? What am I missing as educator to better support this process? And it's not going to happen in a semester, right? But how can I plant the seeds? And for me, those questions got answered through embodiment, which was linked in the traditions that I explored, was linked to spirituality. Though I have to be careful because I don't want to project my own spirituality onto other people, but to help them find their own roots and wisdom. And so when I say embodiment, I mean the kind of deeper self that Leon talks about, right? That we talk about in the deep coaching. Less ego, more what's your deeper wisdom? And I think in order to really be able to discern, and I'm using my hands here because I think it's a little like, well, like I often talk about internalized oppression, right? Those messages that we take in about ourselves or our groups, like we breathe in smog, they saturate so much of the world that it's difficult to not take it into our sense of self. For me, one of the things that my embodiment paths, which I'll talk more about in a moment, helped reveal is to be able to discern those internalized messages feel very different. They're shaming, they're judging, they're dehumanizing. Whereas my deeper wisdom, even if it's just a whisper, is affirming, it's loving. It might be like, girl, you gotta get a little more training. Or like, really not a great choice on your part. Right. But so it's not like hallmarky, but it does come from a place of love and belief in my true being, which feels distinctly different than the harmful socialized messages.
Yes.
But I didn't know that until I embarked on the path, which for me took first mindfulness, then Buddhism, then yoga, then somatics. And in that mix was deep coaching, which helped me really attune to that deeper sense of self.
I am so happy we're sitting here having this conversation. This is a very important topic, and I don't know of anybody that is better suited to answer some of these questions, difficult questions that I'm about to ask you.
Okay.
From the standpoint of, because you have dedicated your life to social equity work, that is so important given just the dynamics, just the evolutionary trajectory of humankind. It's just, this is where we're at right now, and this is how we've unfolded, and we have to confront certain truths about our past and our present in order to change our future, right?
Yeah.
Now, one thing that I've noticed, again, for better and for worse, is nowadays in the 2020s, is an over identification with the personal self, the body that I'm in, the skin color, the everything having to do with the external, which again, on one level is essential in order to heal from wounds that have been sort of adopted, experienced, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, when we talk about spirituality, we're talking about the self beyond form.
Yeah.
Right. So where are you right now with your understanding of how, and again, there's so many layers to this and nuances to this in order to properly answer it. And I think we should discuss this for a little bit in terms of, how do we square this sort of circle
Yeah.
between
So true.
sort of personal identity and our spiritual selves?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw a couple quick thoughts out there just to kind of have them in the space and then try to go deeper.
Yeah.
For listeners, I just want to say this is such a complex topic that we're not going to get to all of it.
Not
But
certainly.
so one thing is the spiritual and the self, in my view, are deeply interconnected, not separate. And yet in Western cultures, mainstream Western cultures, they are often so disconnected that we have to go on a journey to rediscover them. And what that looks like depends on who we are, which is based on our identities in the world. Like we can't go on that journey removed from the context in which we're currently living. So for me, as a white person, US citizen, growing up in the United States with working class roots, now a lesbian and a feminist, to reconnect my current outer self, how I live in the world, with a deeper knowing spiritual self, I have to do the reckoning of what my white bodied self means in this world. And so for me, that means one of the costs of whiteness in the United States is that in order to get the quote unquote benefits of whiteness, many white people had to disconnect from their cultural lineages. Their, my ancestors came over as immigrants. They were leaving something. We have somewhere, everybody has indigenous roots somewhere. Not like I have one Cherokee or Ojibwe uncle somewhere, not that. Like all of us come from somewhere fundamentally, right? But to buy into to live the way the world is telling us to live has very often meant severing from our ancestral lineages for white people in this country. And I say this country because I know DCI is a global community and different cultural contexts have different histories. And so what that means for me is that it's a journey to reconnect to what's been lost that I don't even know. And for me, that also I didn't know my biological father. So I don't know what roots, like there's a whole gap there in addition to the Polish German roots that my maternal grandparents had and lineages that come from that. And so that history and like merging the spirituality and self, kind of reclaiming, necessitates that I go through the impacts of constructions of whiteness, racism, colonialism, all of those things. And for me, that's a felt sense because there's like a wound there that didn't know until I started doing this work. For people who come from indigenous roots, I live in traditional Dakota and Ojibwe and Anishinaabe homelands. You know, their journey will be different because of the way settler colonialism has impacted them. For African American friends and colleagues, their journey will be different because of the way racism has impacted them. And so fundamentally, bringing the two together necessitates a looking at some of that history and what it has meant for each of us, both individually and collectively. The other thing I would say before I pause, because I know that this community doesn't necessarily dive into politics the way I'm going right there.
Yeah.
One of the things I loved about DCI is that it was able to hold the community and the training that I was able to hold space for that complexity without bypassing politics. And I think I've been in mindfulness spaces, Buddhist spaces, yogic spaces, somatic spaces, coaching spaces, where there's this desire for heartfelt, peaceful connection with each other, so much so that they'll bypass what you have to go through to get to that place.
Yes.
And if you don't do the accounting of that history, who's in the space, who's not in the space, why aren't they in the space, who can speak up, who can't, what's happening in their lives, what are the relations between us, whether we want to drop them or not, they're still there because we haven't, as a world, worked through those things. And so if we don't account for them, then any kind of peace we get is a very fragile, shallow peace. And it comes really at the comfort of people who are more normative, and at the extreme pain, discomfort of people who are not. And I'll give you an example. I was in a yoga class once, deep immersion, and it was it was all white people and all heterosexual people, and I'm a lesbian. That morning or the night before was the night of the Pulse shooting, which you live in Florida, I'm sure you know. Many years ago, for listeners who don't know, um, person went into a LGBTQ club with weapon and shot and killed many people. And it's important both because it's an act of violence for anybody and because for LGBTQ folk, our bars have been necessary sanctuaries and community centers for survival. Like Stonewall happened out, the riot in Stonewall happened outside of a bar. It's similar to what happens when somebody goes into a black church or goes into a mosque or a synagogue. It's not the same because it's not spiritual necessarily, but it's a community sanctuary that has been so necessary for people's survival. So, and it was a Latinx night. So LGBTQ folk, people of color, sanctuary, random terrorist killing. And I was devastated, just devastated. Um, and I thought, well, what better time to go to a spiritual holding space, right? I went there and I knew the teacher. I didn't know most of the people in the class outside of the class sessions that we had already had, but I knew the teacher. We were like 3/4 of the way in and nobody had acknowledged it. Probably because they didn't know it. Probably because they didn't have to know it. But like my feeds were blowing up with people in my community acknowledging it. And I could not be present until I named it. I was getting more and more hurt, more and more activated because it was in the space but not being named. And I finally named it and they acknowledged it and moved on, right? They didn't know how to hold space for it. And that's not necessarily a flaw for them. I think that's what this world creates. But I say that story to say that those kinds of things are always in our spaces in some way. And if we don't hold space for them, allow them to show up and connect, forge connections that are authentic, like we don't have to necessarily stay there. But if we don't hold space for the reality that they're there for some people, then the connection is very fragile. And too often spiritual spaces that I've been want to go right by. And if somebody brings it up, they're seen as the disruptors of the peace instead of addressing. Like, yeah, how do I hold space for that? Unfortunately, I found this is why I find the yoga and social justice community, the mindfulness and the politicized somatics community, because there are people weaving these together and getting to a deeper level of healing that allows for all of that. And I'll say one more thing. My training with DCI and Leon happened in the summer of 2020, or that was part of the training. So we had been in lockdown, all the world adjusting, right, to the COVID pandemic and the I think that was around 2020 and the isolation. It was also the summer George Floyd was murdered, which happened less than 10 minutes from my house. And so during DCI, the city was militarized. There were, National Guard helicopters. I could hear pipe bombs happening a few blocks away. It was a racial reckoning of like, we just watched a Black man assassinated on television or on social media. And this is one in many. And I can't show up in spaces with those things happening without bringing those things with me, recognizing that I'm a white woman and I don't have that kind of daily visceral fear. Not from that purpose anyway, not from that arena. And while we didn't necessarily go into the issues, people held space for it and held space for my, like, I think there are bombs. I was at a gun shop or was that pipeline, and like, how do I protect my neighbors? How do I show up for racial justice in this moment? And I was worried, having been in many spiritual spaces, that were like, that's not here, what we're here to talk about. And yet my heart was hurting so much.
Mm.
I needed to be there, but I needed to be recognized while being there. And that there was some beautiful holding of space. So how do we, I guess I would say, I think we have to account for the outer identities and the politics around power that happen with that before we can get to the deeper heartfelt connection wisdom.
Yeah.
And I think how we do that depends on what our histories are. But I do believe there is a deep human connection between us, and that ultimately the work I do politically, is to get us to that place so that we can forge connections that are heart-centered, that are authentic, where we can all fully show up in our wounds and our healings and our possibilities. That's authentic and not shaped so much or kind of constricted by all these learned things that are and the practices that DCI offer are beautiful ways to get there. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much in there. What one of the things that it comes up for me, and what I recognize in a lot of these spaces, is just like any one of us have our own trauma histories that need to be looked at in therapy and coaching and whatever modality is helpful to navigate that. And as you're conversing about it, things are going to come up. You're going to remember things. You're going to connect the dots, right? Just like that happens, it also happens collectively as well. And so to the degree that something is coming up within a given community, and the reason I'm framing it this way as well is that there's too much going on in the world, too many horrors, too many tragedies for us as human beings to be on top of all of them and to sort of process all of them.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is for us to process all of them, but it is for us to process the ones that are emerging, whether from our mouth or others' mouths around us. Because it's like that collective pain that is closest to us, that is seeking to be healed, witnessing, and through moving and through being seen, heard, felt, all those things. And so because I think I've noticed that folks get overwhelmed naturally. We have so many things happening in our own lives.
Yeah.
Oh, here comes Beth. She's going to add something to the mix. Oh, this is not for, and then they're like, okay, this is too much. This is too much. Right. So on a human level, I understand, that kind of like, oh my God, not one other thing I need to sort of worry about and think about. And at the same time, what you're speaking about specifically, though, are healing spaces. We're not bringing this up in a random sort of family, gathered around Thanksgiving dinner necessarily. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. But you can see why there might be pushback there, right? Of course. Yeah. But in a healing space, you would want an environment in which whatever is coming up to be able to be seen, felt, heard collectively together so that we can move through it together. Right. So that's part of what I'm hearing here is that, as any one of us is feeling any sort of pain, contraction, fear, turmoil around anything that is happening either to ourselves or to those around us, right? It's important that we're able to be in an environment where we feel safe enough, or at least have an environment where we feel safe enough in order to process that together. And not many people do, unfortunately. In fact, the majority, I think, of humans do not have that. Yeah. I think that's part of what happens. And so then we're in our own silos and sort of ecosystems and, not being able to fully feel what others feel. That's where we go back to the intellect because we read about it. Oh, look at these people up in arms about this, that, or the other. And we don't have any sort of connection to it. Right. But if we were able to actually listen to the person that's experiencing that pain, that hardship, and open our hearts to that person, we're going to start feeling them, going back to
Yeah.
the somatics.
Yeah.
And just going back to the complexity of this all, not many of us are able to be with our own stuff, let
Yeah.
alone somebody else's stuff. So herein lies, I think, part of the complexity in terms of our ability to heal what's happening in the world, and why work like the ones that we're doing
Mm.
is so essential.
Yeah.
Right? For us individually to be that empty container, that vessel that is allowing and open and able, but also then to teach that to others so that they then are also able to, whether they're professionally going to do that or not is irrelevant,
Mm-hmm.
because we all need to be able to confront
Yeah.
the pain of this world on some level, in some way. And we will, whether we do it consciously or unconsciously, whether we do it in a healthy manner
Right.
or an unhealthy
Yeah.
manner,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
confronting it all, period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a lot of what I'm hearing as well here in terms of,
Mm-hmm.
just it's complex.
Mm. Yeah. I love your emphasis on the collective. I think that's a thread I hadn't yet addressed. So much of the care that gets talked about in a lot of healing spaces, and I say mainstream just to distinguish between like what's popularized and recognize that there are pockets of people doing it very differently. And I always gravitate towards those pockets. In fact, when I found DCI, I'll circle back for a minute. I had been doing all kinds of research on coaching programs, and I just kind of felt like it just feels so transactional. And I didn't have that language, but I was just like, I don't want some formula where somebody's going to be like, do these 10 things and you too will be a millionaire. Like,
Right.
it just doesn't resonate with me. And there's something, the deep transformation piece, the healing piece, the heart-centered piece of DCI, even before I knew the community, which really deepens all of that, was just like this. This feels like what I'm called to do. And it echoes so many of the other work paths that I've taken. And I say work broadly, not to just mean professional, but like inner work, collective work, community work. So much of the mainstream self-care stuff, take a bath, get a massage, go on a retreat like the one I'm going to do this afternoon. So I want to acknowledge I do those things.
Yeah.
But they're individual. And they're often like, do these things so that you can go back to do the hustle, work, grind culture. And they require a certain amount of leisure and money. But so many social activists are talking about collective care. How do we show up with and for each other in really meaningful ways? And that speaks to how we build healing spaces, because in order to show up with and for each other in meaningful ways, we have to allow space for each other.
Yes.
And that means our complex histories. And it also might mean, how do I perhaps represent something or someone who has harmed you in the past? Whether it's me personally doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter initially, because often we have our armoring up as a kind of survival mechanism. I'm even feeling this with you sometimes because we haven't met really before this. And I'm like, is he thinking way too political?
Yeah. Right.
Like my armoring is up, and I'm skilled enough to know I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
But in other moments, like in that moment with the morning of Pulse, it wasn't about skill. It was about my heart is hurting.
Yes. Right.
And I need this to be in the space for me to be in the space. And I need you to be able to hold this. You're not accountable for it. You didn't do it, and you may not know how to hold it, but I can't show up until this is recognized. And so I do believe that there are ways that we need this collective care to move through the multiple traumas that are happening in the world. And I don't use that word lightly. We are experiencing multiple traumas in this world. And it's different based on who we are, which traumas are most alive. But there are ways to do that repair work, and it has to happen in community if we want to build something different. And I think some of the practices in DCI really help lead, like even Emergence. I was revisiting it and listening to you and Kate, and I was like, yeah, because social justice communities are talking about emergence all the time, right? How do you follow Peter and Marie Brown and all the emergent strategy folks? How do you follow where the aliveness is and cultivate many moments of growth and connection that can then ripple out, right?
Is that not what has been happening in society?
Yeah.
We see these tragedies happening, and of course it's sort of indicative of, hey, something's wrong in the world, and this
Yeah.
shouldn't happen, of course, on a level. And at the same time, the response to these
Yes.
moments is that emergence of something different, new, more whole, that is
Yeah.
wanting to happen. And we as a society are calibrating, I feel, in the right direction.
Mm.
This is what has been happening. The work that you do, the response that has happened in this country, to the pains of so many people.
Yeah.
It takes time. We're kind of so microscopically focused on this precise moment and wanting it to be sort of something else.
Mhm.
But just like we're in a moment in the seat with a therapist or with a coach, and the deepest pain and trauma is emerging and resentment is there,
Mhm.
it's not indicative that, again, something's wrong. It's indicative that this is here to be looked at, and it's in the process of being cleared and healed. And
Absolutely.
it takes years, takes
It
decades,
takes lifetimes,
takes
decades,
lifetimes.
many lifetimes. Yes.
Yeah.
Here's also where I think that discernment comes in, because I don't know about any of the listeners, but uh I still get that like desire to argue. And I
Yeah.
don't like conflict. I hate conflict.
Yeah.
There's this like there is this part of the world that's very polarized,
Yeah.
and where we can stay at the us and them.
Yes.
And I too get into that. I feel the impulse, but underneath that is a desire to be seen, a desire to connect authentically, um,
To feel safe.
to feel safe. And if I can be like, there's that energy, that's not who I want to be in this moment. There may be times when that's necessary, like I need to shut that harm down or something, but I don't want to stay there. I don't want to live from that place. Um, I want to cultivate the emergence. And so instead of being like, I can argue on Facebook, I can be like, where is life and community being built right now?
Mm.
Where can I support the emergence? And or where can I, given my particular identity, be with someone who is struggling to unlearn the harmful parts?
Mm.
So for instance, I do believe that there's work white people need to do with other white people, that folks of color can do it if they want it, but it's exhausting, so many people have said. And like, can you just go talk to white people? And so there's this like, I can be with people in that space and help move them because I've walked that journey. And it doesn't take the same toll on me that it might take on someone who then is on the receiving end of some harm that echoes other harm,
Yeah.
right? It's like if transgender folks have to explain to people who are not transgender why they should exist, right? That's painful. And they may not have the capacity to do that all the time. But I, as a non-trans person, can do that. And that's part of my role in the world, I think. And we can help each other move through what I see are those really kind of learned paradigms,
Mm.
what Leon might talk about as ego, but collectively, um,
Yeah.
and get to that deeper place. And I also think about you and Kate were talking about trauma informed coaching and co-regulation. And I think about the great late Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who talked about being on refugee boats, and just like one centered, grounded person could have so much impact in the energy field of other people's nervous systems,
Mm.
so that I mean, one of the things that my own trauma and somatics work has taught me is that when people are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the immediate trauma responses, you often can't get to your deeper self or they might call it the rational cognition, but I don't think it's a thinking based thing. It's feeling deep core wisdom connection, Beth's core self with Jonathan's core self. And underneath all that learned stuff. But when we're trying to be safe in what feels like an unsafe environment, whether it's physically, literally unsafe in this moment or not, it feels like something that was very, very unsafe. And you can't think yourself out of that experience. You can't like argue yourself out of that experience or each other out of that experience. You have to first cultivate a sense of connection and safety. Get to some level, not of like calm necessarily, but of groundedness. And then we can begin to peel back some of the layers of like, is the fact that I'm feminist really making you unsafe right now? Or does that feel like something familiar? You need to be heard. Okay, how can we do that while still allowing space for feminine? Like, what does that look like? Or other moments where people really are unsafe. That's what I meant by being in healing spaces where people bring all of their traumas, and I might represent something that I personally have not done something to someone else, but I represent something they have to be armored around to survive in this world. And I don't need to take that personally. I can understand the collectives that have led to that. And then what does that mean? How do I then show up in a way that is authentic to my core self, but allows space for us to forge something different?
Yeah. This is where the self-care that we're talking about, it's kind of like the over focus on self-care sometimes. It's just a shift in intention, because you can't have collective care without self-care. You can't have collective healing without self-healing.
Yeah.
Because in order to be that container, in order to not take things personally, in order to have the space to receive, we need to be as clear as possible and as aware as possible within ourselves in terms of what's happening, what's pulling at us, what our triggers are.
Yeah.
Self-regulate that in order to meet the collective as well, right? So they go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Just like personal transformation and collective transformation go hand in hand. They're a cycle.
Precisely.
Interrelated. Yeah.
Precisely. What was it like to go from the head to the heart, so to speak, from the mind to the body, when you started to do more somatic work?
Yeah.
And encountering perhaps parts of your lived experience that you weren't so in tune with before?
It was a roller coaster. Wasn't always comfortable. Fortunately, I had a strong support team around me, which I would recommend for everyone. Bell Hooks says we don't heal in isolation, we heal in community.
Yes.
I remember being in a yoga class, and I would go there partly because I had just had some just like horrible personal ruptures and just kind of climbing my way out of that hole and trying to heal. And I went to this class because the teacher seemed like she had a life I was interested in living, and the people in the space were doing their personal work. Like for me, all of these spiritual practices that I've mentioned, Buddhism, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, none of them are about what happens on the cushion so much as they are developing a relationship with yourself and the world around you to be how you want to be off your cushion. It's the practice ground, anyways. And I was just like, everybody here is doing that. I want to be around them. And I remember I have a lot of lower back pain and hip pain. And so there are certain yoga poses that are my nemesis. Think back, that would be that. And my teacher supported right behind my shoulder blades on my heart, behind my heart, and opened me into a back bend. And I sobbed. I just like sobbed. And it happened one other time years and years ago before I had even really started this journey, my first experience was some somatic work, and my therapist had her hands on my head. And again, just like that gentle holding, almost like saying, you don't have to think so hard to get this, right? It's really the secret is feeling. The feeling after many years of armoring can be really unsettling. Um, and so again, that it's significant that she was holding my heart and opening me towards her the way she did the assist. Like my heart was opening towards her with all the people in on their own practice. They weren't like paying attention to me. So again, that like collective container. And there was a lot of that. It has not been a smooth process, and I have gone back and forth. And this is one of the things academia can do. I have to constantly monitor in my head. So, not that it's a bad thing. There's a lot of skill up here, but it needs to be coming from the full being, because for so long, my head, my strategizing, my hypervigilance was what was keeping me safe, but it also was cutting me off from all the other things. And so showing up as the whole self, including this inside of the head, but all of the beings, energetically and somatically, lineage-wise, has allowed for the complexity you're talking about with a level of maturity to be in the unknowing and trust that we're all being held by something bigger, even if we have like different beliefs about what that is. We are held. Like, I think for me, social justice is a large scale framework, much like a lot of spirituality, because it's something I can rest back. But then that emergence, there are cycles of life that happen without our doing any, the flowers that are going to, work happening in the soil under the snow right now. Nature has insights, and that's where I get a lot of my own spirituality from. And so if I can rest back into that, then I don't have to, it's the being rather than the doing.
What have you noticed? So the healing process is kind of going down and in and excavating and healing and going through this process. And then naturally what starts to emerge is this desire to give back in new ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so in so many ways, your whole career has been about giving back and about, tending to society and to individuals. In what ways, though, has your own healing journey sort of changed your purpose, your meaning, and the work you want to be doing out in the world?
Yeah, good question. I think that's still evolving. I'm in a redefinition phase where I'm like, what do I want to be when I grow up?
Right.
Which is both terrifying and exciting. At 55.
Yeah.
I'm also embracing my crone years, Jonathan. So I'm
Okay.
like, well, I have earned it. I'm going to be as weird as I want to be. In fact, I have this note a friend of mine said, trust your weirdness. So
Yes.
because there's a part of me that's like, I need to make myself professionally recognizable. I need to be read as professional. And yet some of what I'm doing is countercultural. It's always been countercultural.
Right.
And so it's not professional, but it's not recognized within the frameworks. And
Right.
so part of me is like, I need the legitimacy of being in a recognizable framework. But the other part of me is like, that recognizable framework is not going to help the world that you want to emerge, right? It's not going to support that kind of emergence. We need to allow space for different ways of being and to recognize that those two are valid.
Yeah.
So, healing. Well, I mean, I teach by sharing a lot of my process with students, not to suggest that it's the same as theirs, but because a lot of traditionally aged college students put their professors on pedestals and think they have it all together. And I'm like, you do not see behind the scenes of academia. Wow.
Yeah.
And so just kind of like, yeah, I didn't know. I didn't have it together at 20. Heck, y'all have it way more together than I had.
Touche. Yeah.
And just kind of like, because a lot of the missteps are the journey. And this is one of the things I love about DCI and feminism and yoga and somatics. It's interesting. I keep being drawn to these particular modalities, all of which in their own way say the journey is the work,
Right.
not the end point,
Yes.
which we may not get to in our lifetimes. But like how you get to the end point matters because it's going to shape where you can go.
Mm.
And so helping students say, recognize those vulnerabilities, those learned messages, those, situations that didn't go so well are learning moments.
Mm.
And we get to choose, do we want to grow from this? Do we want to shut down from this? And sometimes we don't have a choice because it's traumatizing. But I see this as kind of planting the seed. There were many things I've learned along my way that I wasn't ready for in the moment.
Mm.
But there's little seed was germinating in the soil. And when I really needed it, I knew it was there. And then I went deeper. I think the other thing my healing journey taught me is that there have been several moments in my life that were, I guess, for lack of a better word, pivot moments, where there was this path I was supposed to take. And maybe I knew how to play that path well. I was an overachiever. But something in me was telling me that wasn't the right path. Something that I couldn't name. I keep referring to like my navel core, because that's where the inner wisdom is held for me. Something in me would whisper, there's another way. And that other way resonates with you. And I often had to just trust it and leap, because all the people around me were like, don't do that. Don't do that. That's not how it's done.
Yeah.
And yet every time I did, it was terrifying. It sometimes moved through moments of lack of support or lots of self-questioning on certain levels. But on other levels, there was this like, yeah, this is right. And it took my life in ways I could not have imagined. And it helped me do what I believe is my purpose. And I think we all need to find our own purpose to contribute to that collective good. We're not all supposed to play the same role. And so for me, that knowing has also shaped supporting other people in their journey and how to hold space for that, how to help them listen to and find that thread, even if it's really, really faint, how to cultivate practices that stay in touch with that thread, because some days it's going to whisper and you're going to be really enticed to go the familiar way. So how do we maintain enough of a relationship with that thread that we can stay the course or come back as a new beginning if we lose our course and follow what we're really meant to do?
Yeah. It's interesting. You were speaking in past terms when you were saying, basically trusting and there's another way and that unfolding. And I couldn't, all I can hear was there's an emergence happening in your life right now.
It's not
Can you,
past tense.
that's not past tense. Can you trust that? And what's beautiful about that is that you've already had proof in your life that abstract sense that you have inside of you can be trusted. Right. And so there is something that is emerging within you that doesn't necessarily fit into a box, that you can be as weird as you want to be. And there is a place for that in the world. And that's in fact what's needed, because why else has your unfolding happened in the way that it has, if not for you to be going back to your sparkle, for you to sparkle in the positive sense, in your fullest light, taking everything that you've accumulated, everything that you've learned, and now give that back.
Good reflection. So deep, coachy of you. Good catch. Yes.
That is why we're here.
Yes, it's true. It is very much in the present tense. So I'm in the career shift. I've been moving in this path for a while, hence going into the deep coach training in 2020. So that's 5 years. But it's really being catalyzed. The universe seems to be like, okay, you're not going to do this on your own. Well, we're going to get out of the mess. That's a generous way of describing. My university closed all the social justice programs. It's happening around the world, or around the country anyway, and laid many faculty off. And so because I have family here, I can't follow a job. Got to be in the geographic region I'm in. And so it's, you know, it's this year going back to teaching is very complex. I'm allowing a lot of grief to move through me,
Mm.
um, for the organization, for all the people who are in it. It isn't just me, and also for me. And then I think the grief is collective also, in that, I'm not sure the world has reckoned yet with the impact of COVID and the fact that so many of our grief rituals are collective, and yet we couldn't do that in the same way during COVID. And then all the things that are happening since then. And I think US culture as a dominant culture really doesn't allow a lot of space for grief. Um, and so there are pockets of people who do it really well and communities who do it really well. But um, like a lot of people, unless they're in the real grief space, they don't necessarily want to talk about it, but it's often there.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a deep sense of possibility of like, yep, I've actually been probably ready for this for a while. And kind of weaving together the different, the different tapestry threads of my experience so that I don't have to be just one,
Mm.
which I think is also needed in this world. Like, how are we called in different places and different moments to show up in our heartfelt way with each other? Um, and what of our different experiences or skill sets allow for that? Like, I can move back and forth between heady political analysis and heartfelt pain and grief and possibility and hope and quirky magic. And it seems like we probably need all of that from all of us, right?
Speaking of that, I we're so many, the world is going to be so many individuals within in this world are going to continue to be displaced given
Yes.
technology, given
Yeah.
just the shifting world order. There's just so many
Mm-hmm.
things happening. And so the other layer here is that you are kind of going through the gauntlet yourself of walking into the unknown, into the mystery, acquiring the skill set of doing that
Mm-hmm.
so that you can also be a light shower for those
Mm-hmm.
that will at some point feel displaced, feel
Mm-hmm.
disoriented, not know that if there is something that can be trusted in
Yeah.
terms of an unfolding in their life.
Yeah.
And so it's never comfortable. None of us want to go through
No.
any of this, and yet for somebody like you who is so service oriented, who's here, whose purpose is to give back to the world, you are walking the trail that will eventually illuminate things for others.
Mm. Thank you. That's very kind and helpful way of framing it. Yeah. I think one of the deep somatic learnings that I learned both through DCI and through one of the lineages of somatics that I study, which is generative somatics and Strozzi Institute. They talk about when you're changing shapes, like, and by shape, they mean like your fundamental core way of showing up in the world. When you're doing that deep transformation, you kind of leave the shore of the familiar, but you're not automatically on the next shore. You're not automatically in the new shape. And in fact, there might be lots of pulls back. You're in open water of uncertainty. And that's really unsettling.
Yeah.
And often the familiar feels comfortable, even if it no longer serves you or the community or the collective. And I think for me, I can stay on it longer in the unknown because I've done it before. And I know that but there is another side,
Yeah.
and it's worth it. And I have the practices to rip myself to be able to rest back into, which are so important. Um, and I have the community that I've built over the years, many different pockets of community that can hold space for that. People who are on their own journeys, but with a similar kind of value set of where we want to go, how we want to create a better world for people. And so, you know, I can nourish and grow that and help others do the same. And I think about, the great Grace Lee Boggs, who recently passed, 100-year-old Chinese American activist, who talked about building, um, instead of building mile wide, inch deep movements, we need mile deep, inch wide movements, right? So we go deep and we build the connections where we are. And then my inch wide, mile deep connects with your inch wide, mile deep, connects with Leon's, connects with Kate's, connects with, right?
That's
Then
right.
it's all written instead of so kind of superficial. It can easily be unsettled.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, that's such a great point. I do feel that that's where we're heading, just a really hyper focus on the here, and everybody's individual here and now, meaning tending to what's right in front of us. There's enough in this world happening that what else can we do but tend to what's in front of us? Our own divine curriculum, so to speak.
Of that, our own divine curriculum, whatever that means to each person.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
How do we forge these threads together, these relations? How do we connect with our own hearts and do our own healing work so that we can show up in the ways we want to in collectives? How do we understand what's ours and what's not? In terms of like, I can't do someone else's work, but I can support them. Or like, that's something that's being projected on me by socialized norms that doesn't feel right. Like that tuning into the inner self. Maybe I've outgrown that stricture. How do I, so many social justice activists right now are using visionary fiction and science fiction to world build, because they're like, none of us know what a world without oppression is like. We haven't lived it. Not in this lifetime, maybe in years ago ancestor lifetime. So how do we imagine, radical imagination, a different world? And I do believe that following that emergence, where that aliveness is, attuning to that energy in yourself and in the world, and I on a certain level, I feel like that's what DCI was for me, like that community. Like there's something alive here. There's a beautiful container that seems to be able to hold a lot, even though the world is in flux and we're learning a lot right now, right? Still, there was like it's like this like radar, like, oh, there's something here, and then how do we from that place move outward, tend to what's in front of us from that clear as possible, authentic self. Yeah. And collective self, I guess. Yeah.
And collective self. Yeah. As we bring this conversation to a close, if you can leave listeners with one sort of tidbit, insight, practice to help them on their own transformational journey, what might that be?
Who are you being called to be in this moment? And how do you know that?
Just want to leave that for folks to sit with, because it is something to be digested and such a beautiful invitation.
Who do you want to be in this moment, and how do you know that?
Such a gift to be here with you. Thank you for sharing so much of yourself.
Thank you for going on the ride with me and for holding such beautiful space.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Lovely to connect with you, and thank you for all these beautiful conversations you're hosting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us today. To learn more about today's guest, visit our podcast landing page at www.podcast.centerfortransformationalcoaching.com. You'll find links to their website, social media, and anything else they might want to share there. And if you're curious to explore more about our work, our trainings, or the deep coaching approach, you'll find everything at www.centerfortransformationalcoaching.com. A new episode of this podcast releases every 2 weeks, so please subscribe wherever you listen to stay up to date. Until next time, stay present, embrace love, and continue sensing into what life is calling you toward. See you soon.